Welcome to today's episode of On Record PR, where we dive deep into the strategies and insights that matter most to law firm leaders. I'm Gina Rubel, CEO and General Counsel of Furia Rubel Communications, and today I'm joined by my colleague Leslie Richards, who is our Chief Innovation Officer. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Gina. Great to be here.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me talk you into this.
Not a
Um,
problem.
I really appreciate your insights, and I've learned so much from you. And so today I really want to talk about how to develop and manage high-performing teams. This is something you've been doing for several decades,
Yep.
and it applies to not only to our teams here at Fury Rubel, but to law firm practice groups, law firms in general, and there are other departments like knowledge management, business development, marketing, and so many others. So I'm going to just jump right in, Leslie. How do we build innovative teams?
It's such an important topic because I think law firms are feeling pressure to innovate, and I think that innovation is perhaps not the goal or the focus traditionally for law firms. It has been stability, authoritativeness, expertise, and innovation hasn't always been a place where law firms had to really put energy. So we can borrow from industries that have really focused on how to build high performing, innovative teams and try to bring that into law firm culture as a way to grow and stretch and really begin to leverage some of the data that's out there about building innovative teams. Google did a 2-year study. It was called the Aristotle Project, where they interviewed and analyzed the behaviors and patterns and leadership styles of teams that were highly innovative and very high performing. And they came away with some key factors in terms of what builds those really innovative and high performing teams. Among those things were uh, work with meaning, work that had impact, clarity of direction, and one of the really big ones was psychological safety. Psychological safety is absolutely key to innovation and to really high performing innovative teams.
That's really interesting to hear because psychological safety, it's not a term of art we normally hear in law firms, um, or in any big corporate setting for that matter. So can you explain what that is?
So, in environments where there's a sense that taking risks and possibly making mistakes is something that is accepted as long as it's moving a team forward and used as a way to learn and grow, creates a space where people are willing to be creative, where people are willing to think outside the box, where they are willing to innovate solutions to client problems, to practice management, to any number of issues that a law firm might face, um, because they know that there is a tolerance for exploration and there is a safety, there's an underlying safety in that culture, right? And that
So
you can breed that as a leader by encouraging open communication, modeling vulnerability, for example, rewarding contributions, acknowledging and rewarding contributions, um, and encouraging people to think openly and communicate openly.
but doesn't that mean that there would have to be some non-billable time in especially in billable law firms and the firms that bill by the hour for attorneys and staff members? Well, staff is not typically billable, but for attorneys in particular to be allowed to be innovative?
You know, I think that gets into pricing models and structures in law firms, and I know you've done a number of podcasts on that, Gina, and how law firms value certain kinds of activities and how they structure their billing. But I think the long and the short of it is that as different service models develop, as technology moves forward, as certain parts of the industry consolidate, the pressure on firms to innovate is going to be ever increasing. And so taking a page from the book of industries that have been focused on innovation, like tech, and they've really explored and studied what breeds innovation in organizations and what kills it, right? Um, that's a useful place for law firms to begin to explore as they try to build those teams internally.
That's interesting. Well, we're going to take a quick break for a message from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back to this topic.
Sure.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Rubel enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com.
Welcome back, everyone. We're talking about building high-performing teams, and I'm here with Leslie Richards. So we started talking about building high-performing teams and psychological safety and what it means. How do you create an environment where people feel psychologically safe?
Sure. I think we talked a little bit about that, encouraging open communication, being willing to take ideas from different places, different parts of the firm, people at different levels of seniority, acknowledging those contributions. I think there are also different leadership styles, right? And I think um, the ones that are more effective in a knowledge economy are different than maybe some of the traditional leadership styles that we might think about, right?
Okay,
So,
I'm going to stop you right there. What is a knowledge economy? I'm not familiar with that term.
okay. So if you think about knowledge workers, think about people who have to use a skill set, and usually an academic skill set of some kind, an expertise, and they need to apply that to their work. And so fostering an environment where there is curiosity, where there's intellectual growth, where there's professional growth is key to retaining those kinds of workers. And it's different than managing somebody who is performing, say, a rote task, or somebody who is in a manufacturing environment. You sort of think about kind of late 18th, early 19th century managerial styles. And that's kind of what we've inherited today, even though we're managing workers who are doing very different kinds of work, right? We're managing workers who really have to apply critical thinking. They have to be curious. They have to be investigative in the way that they think about things. They need to be problem solvers. And I think maybe that's the best way to put it. Somebody working in a knowledge economy is somebody who has to solve a problem, and they need to use
Which
their
is what
expertise to do
lawyers
it.
do every day.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and what's interesting, I had a conversation with a friend of ours through the Legal Marketing Association, and she runs their knowledge department.
Mm,
And she was talking about how when they were doing some Gen AI testing, that they knew that they had to do X, and if it was going to fail, it had to fail within X amount of time, and then they
hmm
had to move on to the next phase. And it was such an, again, we're using the word innovative, and we're talking about innovative teams. And it was so innovative for a law firm to think, oh, okay, we could fail and it's okay.
Yeah,
That's not what we're taught in law school. I mean, it's a really interesting, like, you're just taught that you've got to have the right guidance all the time. And so that this idea of testing and taking those risks, we're a very risk averse industry.
yeah, yeah. And
So,
certainly there are places that are appropriate to take risks and places that are not. But that idea of
which would not
failing
be
at
with client work.
exactly. But that idea of failing fast is important. And so maybe the risk or the innovation is in how you structure that client team, or how you approach your messaging to an industry, or how you sort of mesh your professionals and your attorneys, and how they work together. How you adopt AI, what your tech stack looks like. All of those are the kinds of innovations and things that attorneys and firms and law firm leaders can think about as places where you innovate, where you're not sort of touching that core of the work, which is the expert advice that attorneys provide to their clients. You're sort of touching everything around it as a way of making your firm more effective, more client focused, more agile, and a place that is going to retain upcoming talent because they see an innovation mindset, they see a growth mindset.
I think you just hit the nail on the head, because retention and acquisition of talent is just as important today as retention and acquisition of clients.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of the old school, especially the smaller and mid-sized firms, getting eaten up, acquired and or merged with, uh, because they haven't innovated. And we know, and this is a big topic in the legal industry, that innovation, it's do or die. It's
Mhm.
it's not an
Mhm.
if. You have to innovate. So I'm going to ask you one last question so that we keep this pretty tight, on a timeline. But tell me a little bit about leadership styles and how some of the leaders can approach innovation, um, in the way that you've approached it at Furia Rubel, because I'm not easy to work with, and
I would,
don't
I
answer
might,
that.
I might argue that point, but I would say, and I don't want to, yeah, I don't know that I want to assume that I have a perfect beat on my own leadership style. But what I will say is that there is really great data at this point, and it's really well documented. The leadership styles that work with knowledge workers in that kind of an environment. We're not talking about producing widgets in a factory here. We're really talking about growing and growing a garden, right? People who are thinking, people who are blossoming in their careers, people who are really able to think creatively to solve problems for clients and for the firm. So if you think about the kind of key leadership styles that work in that kind of an environment, and I'll just run through them, right? If you were to sort of look at Management 101, it would be transformational management style, leadership styles, servant leadership, or kind of a coaching leadership style. And I think maybe if we think about one takeaway for our listeners today, if you want to think about who you are as you approach your team and whether or not you're the right fit, these are the three things I would think about. Are you a transformational leader? I think a transformational leader is somebody who has a big vision. They're the big idea person, right? And they're able to communicate that effectively so that their team is excited about the future and working towards what that future vision looks like. And I would say that's a transformational leader. Um, Little charismatic, very inspiring. That's one kind of leadership. And not all of us are that kind of leader. Servant leadership, which doesn't sound perhaps quite as glamorous, but I think is a really effective leadership style, is one in which you're really focused on building trust, supporting your team, making them know that they're supported. Again, that's really that underpinning of psychological safety, that we're here in a collaborative space to really grow a team and to solve problems, to grow a firm. Um, and you sort of really reduce the fear of failure in that environment. So servant leadership, that would be another style. And then third would be sort of the coaching approach as a leadership, right? Where it's really almost more of a one-on-one mentor-mentee. We're really talking about the personal growth of a specific member of that team as a way of moving forward the performance of the team as a whole. So,
Well, I think it's important just to note that, in understanding that there's many different size law firms listening to this and law firm leaders, that it doesn't mean that the managing partner or the executive committee has to do the coaching or the one-on-one. It's really about providing the resources and tools
Yes.
so that other people, whether it's your practice group chairs or outside consultants or whatever the case may be, or an internal professional development department, because I don't want listeners to think, oh, I have to do that now too, because as a former practicing attorney,
Sure.
there's only so much time in a day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think those
But
are
making
really
those
important
resources
keys.
available, making those
Yes,
resources
yes.
available, and being the kind of leader that that makes sure that those resources are there for your team. Yeah.
So give me one takeaway.
Sit down, take a good look at yourself, an honest look at yourself. What skill sets do you have in that kind of portfolio of leadership styles? And which kind of leader are you? And then think about how you augment that and whether or not that's the right fit for your team. Is your team responding to that kind of leadership? Do they need you to make an adjustment? So
And
that
I'm
would
going to
be my
add to
takeaway.
that, ask yourself why you should care. So you mentioned an article, and you should, every leader should care.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned an article, Aristotle something. Can you tell us what that is again?
I mentioned a project, which was the
Mm,
Google's research project on high performing teams and innovative
okay.
teams in specifically, and it was called Project Aristotle. And we can provide a link to a little summary of that project. Google has one, and we can
Okay.
provide a link
So
to that in our show notes.
all right, perfect. So I
Yeah.
want to thank our leaders for joining us today. We do welcome your feedback on our new podcast format and any topics you want to hear about. We are here for you, law firm leaders. So please email us at podcast@onrecordpr.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes. Honestly, it really does help us. We want to get the word out there on how we can support law firm leadership in the constant evolution. Leslie, thank you so much for
It was
joining me today.
a pleasure.
And
Thanks for having me.
of course, and listeners, we'll see you next week.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.